Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you to the Dean. Thank you to my dear friend, Professor Fuchs. And thank you to Mayor Nutter, and particularly thank you to all the assembled SEPA students. I want to start talking. My staff is like, are you really going to read your speech or are you going to riff? I'm really going to read my speech because we spent a lot of time thinking about this. So I want to start talking about two fellow New Yorkers. First, the man for whom this forum is named, Mayor David Dinkins. You'll hear about the second in a moment. Mayor Dinkins was elected with a swell of hope amid a sea of fear. The dire challenges at that time, the crack epidemic, homelessness, fractured city services, were all made worse by a deep fiscal crisis. And Mayor Dinkins, as you've heard, addressed them with humility and humanity. His policies centered on children and families and communities, from after-school programs to community policing. I was counsel to the UFT at the time, the New York City Teachers Union, and had started teaching in Crown Heights, Brooklyn in September 1991, just weeks after the incident that was the turning point in his mayoralty. David Dinkins loved the city he called the gorgeous mosaic. He believed New York could prosper if we respected our diversity, if we found common ground and pursued mutual goals, each of us important and distinct pieces of that gorgeous mosaic. And I'm honored to deliver a lecture named for him, because etched in me during that turbulent time is an understanding that in public policy and politics, we are always in a race between hope and fear, aspiration and anger. So we're in another turbulent time right now, and my remarks today are an attempt to chart a path forward, a path that leans, as Mayor Dinkins did, on hope, not fear, recognizing full well that fear, anger, and a sense of powerlessness in many ways fueled the results of this election. Which brings me to the other New Yorker who looms large today, actually a former New Yorker, Donald Trump. It's fair to say his approach is quite different from Mayor Dinkins, and that the United States is at a turning point with his ascension to the presidency. Now, my primary purpose today is not to analyze the election. This esteemed university has plenty of intellectual firepower to do that. But I do think that incumbency, inflation, immigration, and identity were at play. And yes, sorry, I do love alliteration. So when people feel powerless to improve their lives, they often vote to punish the incumbent. Indeed, incumbents have been voted out across the globe. Look at what just happened in France today. Inflation. In our fractured society, Americans had at least one thing in common: the cost of housing, gas, and eggs was and is too damn high. Then, as the wizard says to Elphaba in Wicked, you must have a scapegoat to blame, which in this election became immigrants. Finally, identity. As I look at Secretary Clinton, of course, race and gender played a role. But so did class, big time, as evidenced by Trump's gains among non-college educated voters of all races. So with all these factors intersecting in this election, how do we begin to understand what happened? So I start not surprisingly, with people's economic well-being. But I hope by the end of this lecture, you'll understand why. We know that millions of Americans share deep fears and doubts about being able to support themselves, let alone supporting their own families. And two charts speak volumes to me. One, and I don't have them here, but one, the trajectory of wages since 1979 for men with a high school degree. Those workers, again, this is adjusted for inflation, but grok this, those workers make 22% less than they did 45 years ago. This is downward mobility. And it has real economic consequences, but it also has real psychic consequences. It inflicts psychic wounds on a country that has long believed each generation would do better than the last. And the second, for the first time, Democrats won the richest third of Americans while losing low-income and middle-class Americans. The party of working people lost working people. Now, these trends began after the 2008 financial crisis, when people perceived their government was doing more to bail out big banks than to help families recover. It swung the Democrats reversed these trends in 18 and 20, but obviously it swung back hard this year. But before one thinks that this is a Democrat problem, in the last 9 of 10 federal elections, one party or the other has lost control of the House, Senate, or White House. Why? People suffering economically and feeling powerless to change their conditions, they express their dissatisfaction through their vote. But there are other sources of agency and opportunity. Americans do not need a strongman promising to fix their lives. What they need is education, good jobs, and a labor movement to empower themselves, not to be empowered by them, but to use this as opportunity to empower themselves. My union works to strengthen these engines of opportunity. And something that was missed in most of the punditry is that in this election, voters overwhelmingly down ballot supported both public schools and workers' rights when they were on the ballot, even where Trump won. I'll give you 2 examples. One, in one Nebraska county that voted for Trump by 95%, private school vouchers were defeated 60-40. Second, North Dakota, their voters rejected a bid to end property taxes that would have decimated public schools and services, even as they voted for Trump by more than 2-1 over Vice President Harris. These are not anomalies. So yeah, I'm worried about democracy and whether we're headed toward fascism and authoritarianism, and I'm worried about our fundamental rights. But as a political scientist who specializes in extremism and democracy recently posted on my new favorite social media site, Blue Sky, Cass Murray, and I quote, "The fight against the far right is secondary to the fight to strengthen liberal democracy." My theory is public education and a growing labor movement are vehicles for creating agency, empowerment, positive agency amongst Americans. I would argue they are requisites for Americans to prosper and for democracy not only to be salvaged, but to be strengthened. But these pathways to opportunity require fair public policy. So this is our test. I'm a school teacher. This is our test for policy. It's twofold. Number one, will it help make people's lives better? And number two, does it respect basic humanity? And I would suggest that other people are getting to this place as well. Think about what Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Pramila Jayapal have all recently said. They have said that if the president-elect means what he says about enforcing antitrust laws, protecting Social Security and Medicare, and capping consumer credit rates, they'll support that. But if Trump does the bidding of big tech, big oil, and the billionaires who bankrolled his campaign, as early signs suggest, we, the collective we, must expose this monumental betrayal of the working people who voted for him. Because what they voted for, I believe, was seeking lower costs and a better living standard. And then we can reconnect with these voters on a local level by fighting for policies that help working and middle-class Americans have a better life. That notion of the states being a laboratory is really important right now. So, whatever Trump does as president, Americans who care about our democracy have to recognize the needs of and respect the agency of low-income and middle-class Americans. And that means breaking with decades of neoliberal, trickle-down economic policies, policies that have disempowered and disconnected us from each other and hollowed out communities and the American dream while consolidating power for billionaires. So that means learning from another New Yorker, Franklin Roosevelt, who enacted policies that gave all Americans a fighting chance to succeed. So, strengthening the two best pathways to opportunity, public schools and unions. Fighting for a better life. Fighting for the dignity and respect of all. And that's where my members come in, because in a world of great distrust, of great unease, AFT members who work, as the Secretary said, in pre-K through 12 education, higher education, healthcare, and public services, they're trusted. And they're trusted, we're trusted because we make a difference in a very local level in the lives of others. And so, while we may punch above our weight, AFT is 1.8 million members, we grew 100,000 members in this last year. We still only make up 0.5 of the country's population. And so I'm going to borrow something that my wife, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, says all the time, which is none of us can do everything, but each of us can do something to reclaim that promise of America. So let me throw out a few strategies. Here's 3 educational strategies that can enable agency, opportunity, and trust. And they can be done ground up, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, because that's where it works best. That's where you're going to recreate trust, particularly in this era of disinformation. Literacy. Reading should be a national priority for students and the 20% of adults who have difficulty reading. That is what the AFT is doing through our Reading Opens the World campaign. We've given away 10 million brand new books, 10 million, to children, families, and communities over the last decade. Books with engaging topics and characters who kids often explain, oh my God, that looks like me. And in response to the educational losses from the pandemic, the AFT has used Reading Opens the World to disrupt learning loss, connect with families, and build relationships. As others have banned books and tried to erase history, we've given out books, including acclaimed banned books, at more than 400 community events across the country in the last 2 years. We've given books to social workers to bring on home visits so they help connect with children. We've given them to school bus drivers so students can read on long bus rides. And last December, AFT members in Cleveland gave out thousands of books during the Christmas holiday reading parade, the Cleveland Reading Parade. This December will be at community events in Texas and Florida, and we plan to give out another 1 million books in 2025. It's not enough. So we'll work with any philanthropy, any city, any library, any union, any school board who's willing to do this, community by community by community. Second, and this is something that the dean has already said, and that those of us who lived in New York during Mayor Dinkins' mayoralty knows, Mayor Dinkins' Beacon Schools, community schools. Student, family, and educator well-being has to be a focus. The AFT is working across the country to open more community schools, public schools that are both a place and a partnership between educators, students, families, community members, and service providers. From serving immigrant families to adult education, community food banks, clothes closets, to the longer school days that were a centerpiece of Mayor Dinkins' Beacon Schools. Community schools are one of the most effective strategies we have to connect students and families and communities. And they also work academically. The AFT is working with parents to minimize the harm of social media for our young people, taking on the tech companies that put profits ahead of children's well-being. And if you know a teacher, you know that they are stressed out, burnt out, overworked, and underpaid. They're depleted by the difficulties of the pandemic and demoralized by the creep of the culture wars into education. And all of this has created alarming teacher shortages, and of course, we are working on several fronts to reduce stress, improve well-being, and support so that teachers don't feel like they have to leave the classroom. And any of you who want to be a teacher, we welcome you into our profession. But the third one is this: schools have to be relevant and exciting, so kids want to be there. They need engaging, experiential, hand-on learning. In fact, a recent XQ survey found that engagement, see these words, engagement, agency, engagement is the top priority parents want for their children's education. High school must be more than college prep. Every student deserves an opportunity, whether they are immediately college-bound, eventually college-bound, or they are among the 60% of high school graduates who don't go to college. So whether the next stop is university or a microchip lab or a small business, young people have to be adept at 4 skill sets: critical thinking, problem solving, resilience, and relationships. These are the new basics, and that's why high school has to be transformed. And career tech education is a great example of this engagement. CTU students gain knowledge and real-life experience from everything from healthcare to advanced manufacturing to automotive repair. CTE programs partner with industries to offer student internships, apprenticeships, stackable credentials in good in-demand jobs. And here in New York, we're working with Micron Technology, a leader in semiconductor manufacturing, to train middle school and high school students for high-tech careers. And with Microsoft, we are helping educators from communities as varied as New York City, Wichita, Kansas, and San Antonio, Texas, to build students' AI literacy so they can thrive in a rapidly changing landscape. 93% of students who take at least 2 classes in high-quality CTE programs graduate from high school on time, and they graduate with industry-recognized credentials. These experiences should be the norm. So all of this takes resources, which obviously is why Trump doubling down on a pledge to eliminate the US Department of Education and expand school vouchers is dead wrong. So let me be clear. I hope this is not making news. The teachers I represent do not care about protecting a bureaucracy in Washington. But you bet they care about protecting the vital federal funds that go directly to helping kids from poor and working class families. Funding that disproportionately goes to red states. You bet they care about protecting students with disabilities and ensuring the civil rights of all students. These essential US DOE functions, if eliminated, will have a disastrous effect on children and families. Public schools ignite opportunity for students and a union card sustains that opportunity through their careers and into retirement. So I'm going to go throw down another gauntlet. This, I hope, makes news. If the president-elect wants to make good on his populist promises to working-class voters, he'll support all workers' rights to organize and join unions, which, by the way, his designee to lead the Department of Labor has supported. Let me give you just a couple of facts as I end in about 4 minutes. The economic advantages of union membership are clear. Union members enjoy higher wages and better benefits. Union households have nearly 4 times the wealth of non-union households, and they are more likely to own a home and have a retirement plan. Support for unions is at the highest level since 1965, and almost 90% of Americans under the age of 30 support unions, a group that swung towards Trump in this year's election. Nearly half of non-union workers say they would vote for a union if they could, yet only 1 in 10 workers are in a union. In fact, Americans are 13 times more likely to have an Amazon Prime membership than to have a union card. And speaking of Amazon, one cause is 5 decades of efforts by billionaires and big business to decimate unions. Deunionization is a significant factor in the surge in inequality and the decline of the middle class over the last 40 years. So no wonder so many people feel hopeless. Feelings of loneliness and hopelessness and lack of agency are especially acute in young men. Just take a listen to the Manosphere podcasts. Unions, as well as the educational strategies I outlined, are antidotes to this anxiety and isolation that so many feel. Yes, people form and join unions to have agency, to have control over their destiny. And unions, like public schools, allow people across races, backgrounds, and political beliefs to connect, to see their common interests and values, to build solidarity. But conversely, the downward mobility and anxiety facing working people today are the result of a trickle-down economy enabled by political leaders. Think about the last 40 years. A new set of economic rules have prioritized wealth over work, corporate profits over worker pay, shareholder returns over societal value, and the bogus claim that in a plutocracy, economic benefits somehow will trickle down to the rest of us. This system concentrated power in the hands of billionaires and big corporations, giving them wealth and influence at levels exceeding even the 19th century Gilded Age. Sarah Beth Rosenberg and I teach about this all the time. It's no coincidence that as worker power has diminished, wealth has consolidated at the top, inequity has grown, and public confidence in democracy has weakened. So yes, of course, we need to grow the economy, which is always the pretext for neoliberalism. The myth goes something like this: unregulated and unbridled markets with no guardrails will solve everything. And this neoliberal philosophy, it doesn't work, it hasn't worked, it will never work for anyone but the rich, yet it keeps getting repackaged and resold to the American people with a promise that this time it will be different. It's kind of like an ex claiming that they've really changed. So it's time to break up with trickle-down neoliberalism in this country. So as a teacher of history, I kind of look back to an earlier time of economic crisis and turmoil, the Great Depression, for a path forward. Because think about it, it's 2024, think about the 1920s. Not just flappers and speakeasies and the Great Gatsby. It was a time of immense economic equality, of unprecedented wealth at the top, of racism and lynchings, of immigration crackdowns, of tariffs and trade wars, of isolationism, a president at that time who first coined the American First movement and policies that led to the Great Depression. It was also the time of the original progressive movement, which advocated for social and political reforms to help the working class fight and to help the fight against political corruption and to reduce this political and wealth concentration. Progressives, like New York governors Al Smith and Franklin Roosevelt, who focused on tangible solutions that made life better for people, ideas and policies that were later used in the New Deal. So once FDR was elected president in 1932, these progressive policies led the country out of the depths of crisis, especially for the least advantaged Americans. And one of my sheroes, in addition to Secretary Clinton, was Frances Perkins, who served as FDR's Secretary of Labor. Perkins pressed for the Wagner Act, giving workers the right to organize and bargain collectively. She fought for the first federal minimum wage and maximum work week. She chaired the commission that would later become or develop the legislation for the Social Security Act. Roosevelt and Perkins believed in reforms that would propel opportunity for generations and fundamentally restructure America's economy to benefit working folks. What happened to union membership that decade? Union membership surged. What happened in terms of high schools? More and more people graduated from high schools. What happened was the greatest middle class, the creation of the greatest middle class in the history of the world. Yes, I know I am omitting a few facts. But starting in the 1970s, neoliberals and corporate interests coordinated to weaken or dismantle these policies, which has led to our current inequality, economic insecurity, and crisis of democracy. So, SEPA students, let's gather inspiration from those progressive reformers who showed us that we must match times of great anxiety and hopelessness with great ambition. Laws and policies and institutions have to meet this moment. Congress has to pass the PRO Act. We have to increase the minimum wage. We have to rewrite economic rules to stop big corporations and billionaires from further rigging capitalism. Let's build on the Affordable Care Act. Let's guarantee Social Security for generations to come. And finally, invest adequately in public education. Let's provide educators and students with the supports and resources they need for these meaningful pathways that I've just talked about to engage them, equip them with the skills and knowledge they need to have agency and opportunity to find their American dream. And if the powers that be in this country fight against this agenda, we fight back. We have to create an economic movement for all families to be better off. And that takes organizing in our communities and in the halls of power, whether it's transforming a high school or organizing a community literacy event or participating in a local election, supporting a local union, cleaning up a park, or any civic participation that builds agency or trust or community. We'll do our part, my union will. AFT members making a difference in the lives of people every single day, providing these pathways and fighting for respect and dignity of all Americans. Just like when David Dinkins was mayor, we're in a race between hope and fear. For hope to win, this requires all of us. The simple truth is, we all do better when we all do better. We must fight for the promise of America for all of us, for our freedoms, for our democracy, and for working folk and kids to have real agency and opportunity. Thank you. So now I get to bring up Professor Fuchs and Mayor Nutter for a chat and a conversation.